imagine that you're going through the Louvre in Paris. Dozens of thousands of square feet, thousands and thousands of artifacts, but you're there to see one thing. You're there to see the Mona Lisa. So how do you see the Mona Lisa? Well, you could stand in the back of the room that they have assigned to it, probably about 50 or 75 yards away, and you could see how much you could learn by that, but you quickly realize you can't learn a lot. It's too far away. The people are too crowded. So imagine you get as close as you possibly can. Imagine that you're not taken out by a French guard, and you can actually get so close, you put the retina of your eye on the canvas. You quickly realize that that's too close. You can be so far away from something you don't understand it, but you can also be so close to something that you don't understand it. And this is a great way to understand what we're trying to do with biblical studies and preaching specifically. A cursory understanding of the text in preaching never helped anyone because you're not really getting into the details and the nuances of the text. However, there's some of us in the preaching world that love the detailed, nuanced, exegetical things that we find inside the text, that we love to spend 14 years on one verse, showing every application or possible theological nuance we can bring to the table. We get so close, however, that we miss the author-intended perspective. And that's the right word. So, when the Mona Lisa was painted, how close should we be to it? Well, the author had that in mind. There's a certain distance that he was considering from which this would be viewed. So this is true of all of Scriptures, but especially in the Gospel. We are trying to figure out at what perspective does the author want us to see this text. Well, sometimes we're drilling in and drilling in and drilling in, but sometimes the closer we get, we actually miss the meaning, and so we can't zoom in any further. We have to pan out. Sometimes we're looking at the micro view, and sometimes we're looking at the macro view. And again, the reason why this is so critical in preaching the Gospels is because the Gospels have each an explicitly stated purpose. Whether it be the concise, tight argument of Mark, whether it be the high Christology of the book of John, or this connection of Jesus as Messiah in the book of Matthew, or the way that Luke, is the great physician, is trying to help out those that are infringed and bring them back in to show them that they also have hope in the person of Christ. Each one of these has an explicit thing that they are trying to communicate. And so every individual unit of thought that we find inside the book is placed inside of its whole. So how do you do that? How do you preach through a gospel? Well, just a couple of quick things. First of all, don't be afraid of large narratives. I think that if you were to take the resurrection narrative out of any of the Gospels and preach it over 3 or 4 Sundays, you might be able to highlight more insights inside the text, but you may actually miss the point. The author intended this to be read and perhaps even read out loud, and so when you read that text out loud, it takes a few minutes. That was the way it was designed. That's its rhetorical impact that it has. So breaking that text up too many times, ironically, the closer you get to it, you might actually lose the author-intended rhetorical impact. The second thing is this may sound strange, but be sure to preach the text and not the story itself. There's so many details about what Christ did and how Christ did it that we don't know. In fact, this is the interesting part, it's supposed to be that way. John told us that if everything that was done about Christ were written down, that the whole world could not contain the books. And what that means is that not everything Christ did was written down. That does mean, however, that what was written down is critically important. So we're focusing on what's there and not what's not there or absent from the picture. So when we get to a story and we want to fill in gaps, we're tempted to look at a story in Mark and try to reconcile that with the other Gospels. And that's helpful at times, but the point is not how all the other Gospels see this. The point is, how does Mark see this? In other words, he has a specific purpose in mind. It's unique from the other Gospel writers, and we need to focus in on that. Which brings us to our third thing. When you see a gap in a story, be sure and tend to it, but don't pay too much time into it. So we could say it this way, be sure and mind the gaps, M-I-N-D, but don't mine, M-I-N-E, the gaps. In other words, don't try to find some great, interesting nuance about something that's not there in the text. So I heard a guy preaching one time, and he said, well, I know what you're thinking, where is that in the Bible? And he said, well, I know it's not there, but it should be. And so he just went ahead and preached what he thought might actually be in the gospel narrative. The gospel writers are inspired, of course, and we're not. And so what they have said under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit is plenty. We tend to that. Now, the sermon example that's used at the end of the book on Gospels and Acts, or end of the chapter rather, is from the book of Acts. It's one of those challenging texts that I've come across. It's Peter's first sermon, which interestingly is based on several Old Testament texts. So look at that, and we'll see how we honor what Peter's trying to do, but also at the same time show how Peter's individual sermon connects both the Old and New Testament by giving the new covenant gospel relationship influenced by the Old.